Good afternoon. I think we'll get started. Appreciate you coming out on this very frigid day. I want to welcome you to the fourth in our series of seminars on focus on family and disability. Really delighted that you're here today. I'm Tamara Norris, and I'm the director of the Family Support Program here at the school. And we hope that you will enjoy the presentation today and spread the word about our seminar series. We're in the midst of planning a terrific lineup for next year. And what we're seeking to do with this series is to invite practitioner, family members, anybody who is on the cutting edge, has innovative ways of thinking, is interested in connecting around families and disability issues. We've had a terrific year and do hope that you'll stay with us for next year. Just a couple of housekeeping details. We are recording the presentation today, so please hold your questions until the end and we will pass around a microphone. We have an evaluation form in your packet and would ask that you do complete that evaluation form. If you have ideas about presenters or topics that you'd like to see in the future, please share that with us and leave that form on the table outside as you exit today. For those of you who are interested in continuing education units, we have also a form for you outside. There is no eating or drinking in the auditorium, and restrooms are to either side of the elevator bank out in the lobby. And now to introduce our speaker, who for many of you I know needs no introduction. You may go back a long ways with Ann Turnbull and her husband Rudd, who unfortunately can't be with us today because he has woke up ill this morning and was, as Ann said, doubly ill that he wouldn't be able to attend. But we'll be sure and rope him in the future, I think, so that he can share his voice and his expertise. Ann today is going to speak about Two Roads Diverged, creating enviable lives for individuals with disabilities and their families through family and community partnerships. And boy, is this something that Ann Turnbull knows about. Rudd and Ann Turnbull are emeriti distinguished professors in the Department of Special Education and co-founders, co-directors of the Beach Center on Disability at the University of Kansas. And they have just now graced us with their presence by taking the next step in their personal journey and coming back to Chapel Hill to live. When you were last here in the 1980. So they've made the right choice by coming back to Chapel Hill. And we, of course, along with many others in the area, are delighted that they're here. They are co-authors of two leading textbooks in the field of special education, Exceptional Lives, Special Education in Today's School and Families, Professionals, and Exceptionality, Positive Outcomes Through Partnerships and Trust. Their combined publication record includes approximately 45 books, 425 articles, and 100 chapters. In 1999, both were selected as two of 36 individuals who have changed the course of history in the 20th century for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They are the parents of 3 children, one of whom, Jay, experienced multiple disabilities and yet had an enviable life of equality of opportunity, independent living, full participation, and partial economic self-sufficiency. They say Jay was our best professor. So please welcome Ann Turnbull, and thank you, Ann, so much for being here. A warm welcome to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. Rudd came down with flu yesterday, and he kept thinking if he went to bed early last night and had a lot of liquids and asked for forgiveness for all of his sins, that surely he would be better this morning. But maybe he didn't get forgiveness for all those sins, I don't know, but he wasn't better this morning, and he really misses being here. and we'll look forward to connecting in the future. I want to say how happy I am to have Lois Weldon with me. Lois has worked for 20 years with Rudd and me at the University of Kansas as an administrative assistant, our right hand and left hand. And before Lois, her mother worked with us for about 12 to 15 years. So you can tell how far we go back. And she has come to North Carolina to struggle to teach us many of the things she has done for us for 20 years. She is teaching us activities of daily living in terms of technology skills. Let's see if we can get that mark to pick up. Okay. Is that better? Yes. Thank you very much, Tamara. So thank you, Lois, for being here. And also, I could not move ahead without acknowledging our dear friend, Holly Riddle, who we've known since the world was created, and many, many years, a number of decades. And Holly has been so welcoming to us as we have moved back. And Holly, it's always great to be in the same room with you and your dear friend, Doug. So with that, let me hop in and get started. I will be sharing comments, and we'll have a period at the end for questions or comments. So please share anything that you would like to at that time. So we'll talk about two roads diverged. And to get started on that topic, I want to ground us in what the big four outcomes are of disability policy. These four outcomes are in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but in every piece of disability policy. These are essentially, you can think about these as the promises that our country makes to people with disabilities and their families in terms of what policy and services should do in their lives. It should create equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and with independent living not being doing all of your tasks unassisted, but choosing on whom you depend and on what you depend upon them for in terms of living your life. Rudd and I have been very independent over the last 20 years, but we have chosen in so many ways to rely on Lois for so much of the technology in our lives. So independent living is choosing how you live your life. And then finally, economic self-sufficiency. Tamara talked about Jay, our son who experienced multiple disabilities and who had a very enviable life after experiencing a number of unenviable years. This is Jay at his 40th birthday party. He loved to sing and was surrounded by people there who were his friends, probably over 100 people, really celebrating the joy of Jay's adulthood and the happiness that he experienced. Jay passed away very suddenly, totally unexpectedly. 6 years ago, this last week, January 7th, was the day that he died. He had a heart problem and that had been undetected by the EKGs that he had received, but he very suddenly experienced a heart attack and died very unexpectedly. And I will talk so much about Jay this morning or this afternoon. And you can see how, although he's physically not present, he very much is spiritually part of our family and our family journey. So let's think about these two roads diverging and remembering the poem of Robert Frost, Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. As I talk about two roads diverging, these roads symbolically are the road to inclusion and the road to segregation, and how those roads occur in the lives of people with disabilities and their families, and the choices that we make that put us on one road or the other, and definitely the choices that the service system has made that tend often to put us more on the segregated rather than the inclusive road. The road to segregation, for Jay, starting out in a early childhood program for only people with disabilities, he attended school in Chapel Hill until he was about 11 or 12, and all of his classes were segregated classes. He moved to Lawrence, and the only programs that were available were segregated special education classes, special camps in the summer, and then the high school program transitioning into a sheltered workshop where only people with disabilities, and group homes where only people with disabilities lived. So that has been the road that so many people with disabilities have been on, as contrasted to the inclusive role of the inclusive road that goes to a very different place. So in this presentation, I want us to ground ourselves in this question. What withstands the test of time? I've told you a couple of things that Jay started out and lived many years of his life on the segregation road. But I've also told you that he lived a very enviable life. And it was really in his young adulthood, as he transitioned from high school to adulthood, that he was able, thankfully, with a ton of advocacy from his family and his reliable allies, to kind of find the connection, find the path between the segregated road and the inclusive road in order to have a very inclusive adulthood. So as I'm going to tell you that story, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, and as I do, I want you to really think about what was it that enabled Jay to have this incredible adult life that you're going to hear about it. Many people say it's education, that it's what you know. So Jay had learned enough skills to have this inclusive adulthood, very much characterized by dignity. People often say, in business and politics, it's who you know. That he knew the right people, or Rudd and I knew the right people, and therefore he was able to have this enviable life. So I'm going to pose the question, and as you listen, you think about, what did Jay teach us over 4 decades about what withstands the test of time? This is a picture of Jay early childhood when he was born at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. It's hard to see this picture, but can you see this little bump on his head? At that time, Jay had a portion of his brain that was protruding between the soft spot and the skull, and the doctors kept saying everything was fine, but it became obvious in Jay's first year, and this was a time before I came into the picture when Rudd was married to Jay's biological mother, and they discovered during Jay's first year that he had a significant intellectual disability. Well, they moved from Baltimore to Chapel Hill. Rudd was working at the Institute of Government at the time, and Jay's biological mother, unfortunately, had very significant mental health problems and spent a lot of time in the psychiatric hospital at the UNC Medical School, months and months at a time. And Rudd and Jay were trying to figure out life without many services at all. This was in the early 70s, and you can imagine that there were really very few segregated services even at the time. There was a program that started in Durham at one of the Lutheran churches, and I'm blanking on the name of that program right now. The Sarah Barker Developmental Center. I don't know if it's still there. This started in the early 70s, and it was the beginning of an early childhood program, but at that time was more, there was not a lot of early childhood development that had really been established, you know, at that time of how do you teach and how do you support young children. Jay was in that program, and Cordelia was one of the aides that was helping in the program to take care of the young children with disabilities. And when she heard that Jay's biological mother was in the hospital and unable to be at home and to be a parent to Jay, and that Rudd was really struggling trying to keep his job and get Jay over to the program and back every day and do traveling that he was required to do, Cordelia said, "Rudd, don't worry, let me take Jay home, and he can stay with me during the week when you're tied up with travel, and you can get him on the weekend." And look at that picture. Can you see contentment on Jay Turnbull's face? And we look back, we hope as we move back to this area that we might be able to reconnect with Cordelia and to say 46 years later, we still remember her gift of time, her gift of nurture, the reliable alliance that made all the difference in the world to the survival of Jay Turnbull and Rudd Turnbull and Jay's biological mother at that time. Well, as the childhood years came, this is a picture of Jay in our backyard, and I'm forgetting your name, who lived in Heritage Hills with us. Linda. Linda and I were just talking about when we lived out in Heritage Hills on Brandywine Road. Jay was 7 years old, Rudd and I married, and Jay came home to live with us. And isn't he just darling? And he had the most beautiful blonde curls. Well, that was the time, this was 1974, Chapel Hill. The school bus came down our street. Guess what? It didn't stop at our house. There were no programs for kids with disabilities, segregated or certainly not integrated, in the Chapel Hill school. So Rudd and I went to see the superintendent of schools and said, this was, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed in 1975. It went into effect in 1978. So this is 1974. And we asked, said that Jay was coming home to live. We needed for him to have an education. And the superintendent said, if the two of us could go to Raleigh and talk with people at the State Department, Ted Drain was head of the department at the time, if we could get a grant from Ted Drain, if we could identify 6 or 8 other children in similar age and disability, and if we could recommend a teacher, because I was in special education at the university, then he would designate one of the storage rooms in the administration building that's on, I think it's on Merritt Mill Road. Does it have a name? Lincoln Center. That was it. That Jay went to Lincoln Center. It was the only classroom in the building. It had been the storeroom, and Rudd and I got the grant, found the teacher, found the other children. And that was the beginning of Jay's education. here are a picture, I love this picture, of a couple of the other kids in Jay's class. And at the time, I don't have a picture of this, but I want to mention it. At the time, we ran into this, I was at a meeting at the Lutheran Church where the Sarah Barker Center is. I believe it was an art meeting. And someone walked in whose name was Dot Kanzler. How many of you knew Dot? Just Holly. Dot was very active in disability issues, and she was the person who worked hard to develop the first parent-to-parent program in North Carolina, the program that is sponsoring us. And Dot came over to me after we had been together in several meetings and said she really wanted grandchildren, and her children were not ready to have children, and she didn't want to put any pressure on them, so she asked, could she be the grandmother, adopted grandmother to Jay and our daughter Amy. We had one daughter at that time. And that relationship lasted 45 years. Dot was absolutely wonderful in welcoming Jay and Amy over to her house for dinner, to spend the night. She would take them on special trips, and when we moved to Kansas, our relationship maintained. And it was around this time last year that Dot died of a brain tumor, and it was when Rudd and I came back several times with our daughters, Amy and Kate named for Dot, Catherine Kanzler Turnbull, to help take care of her, that we decided to move back to Chapel Hill. So this relationship changed the quality of our life. Think about, in social work, what could happen in facilitating adopted grandparent programs for people with disabilities, grandparents who want young people around and young people who need grandparents. This just happened because Dot happened. But you know, the first time I ever saw Dot, I thought, what a strong resemblance she had to my mother. And my mother had been dead for 6 or 8 years. You know, and so I just wondered, was there any divine intervention in getting Dot and us together? But that is a kind of family support that can be critical in enhancing the quality of life of both parties. So we moved to Lawrence. Jay starts as a teenager. He was, I think, as I said, 11 or 12. In Lawrence, there was a segregated special education program at the elementary school where kids stayed until they were 16 and went to the high school. So there was no middle school class, and certainly no integration for kids with disabilities. Jay was in this program at Lawrence, at the elementary school for a very long time, and then transitioned to the high school. The high school program was just awful. And it was right there in the shadow of the University of Kansas, just as Lincoln Center had been right in the shadow of UNC, and so out of date. Kansas is typically ranked as the #1 or #2 doctoral programs in special education in the nation. And this highly irrelevant segregated program was a mile from the university. So at this program, the teacher would show reruns of the Bill Cosby show frequently, every day, several hours a day. And when we asked her, why, what does this have to do with the kids' education? She said, don't you understand, they'll never be able to get jobs, and they need to learn leisure skills so that they'll be able to enjoy watching television. So that was very far from the promises of equality of opportunity, full participation, economic self-sufficiency. This high school class transitioned to the sheltered workshop. So the high school was set up so the students would go to school half a day and go to the sheltered workshop half a day, where they would spend the rest of their life working in a segregated environment for minimum wages. And at this time, around the country, supported employment was starting. This was the early 80s at the University of Oregon and Rockville, Maryland. There were these pockets of showing that people with very significant disabilities could be successful in typical job settings with the support of job coaches and co-workers. And so we went to the teacher and said, you know, let's work on supported employment. And she said, don't you understand, Jay is the most disabled student in the class. All the other students, far more capable than he, are going to the sheltered workshop. And she said, you just want special treatment for him to be able to go to supported employment when people so much more capable are going to the sheltered workshop. We said, actually, we would love for all the students to go to supported employment. It really isn't special treatment. We'd love equal treatment of everybody having that option. And she said, you are just so unrealistic. You're just not accepting the extent of Jay's disability. By this time, Jay had picked up a second label of autism and was really just on the brink of being diagnosed with what his most challenging disability was, which was a bipolar disorder. And his low depression and his high up mood were very extreme and very, very challenging. And so Jay was a young man that, yes, he was the lowest functioning student in the classroom, but still we could see at Oregon and at Rockville that people who were the lowest functioning were successful. We offered to pay for the teacher and for the director of special education to go to Eugene, Oregon, and to have a couple of days orientation to their program, which they agreed to do. And when they came back, all they did was criticize the program and say, yes, but all the reasons why it really wasn't realistic for Jay. Well, Rudd and I were very frustrated, but Jay was the most frustrated of all. When he was transitioning to the workshop and to the group home along with his class, without, and Rudd and I, if the two of us couldn't do effective advocacy for another program, it's like, who could? We had 6 college degrees between us. Rudd is a lawyer specializing in disability policy, and still we couldn't stop the engine going down that segregated road. And so Jay stopped the engine by choosing one individual to hit and choke every time he saw him. And this person was in the group home, in the school program, in the sheltered workshop, and on the bus, on the little bus that transported all of these people everywhere. Jay would hit him and choke him all the time. It was devastating. This person, it would have been devastating no matter who the person was, but the person that Jay decided to hit and choke was the son of a state legislator. So you can imagine the uproar in our community when Jay was hitting and choking the son of the state legislator. It was awful. We were getting calls all day long about his last aggressive episode. And he kept being put in timeout for increasingly long periods of time. And the more he was in timeout, the more depressed and angry he became. And the more depressed and angry he came, the more he hit and choked. And it was the perfect storm. It was horrible. So we were in terrible crisis. And one of our friends, let me go back here. One of our friends, in fact, it was Jim Kanzler, our adopted grandfather here in Chapel Hill, said, Ann and Rudd, no matter how far down the wrong road you go, if it's the wrong road, turn around. And we could not get to equality of opportunity and full participation and independent living and economic self-sufficiency on the road we were going. There was no way that program could have changed enough because it was entrenched in the old model of segregation. And so we met with the director of the program, and we wanted to withdraw Jay from the program because we knew the purpose of the meeting was to expel Jay, and it was like we wanted to beat him. We didn't want to give him the pleasure of expelling Jay. We wanted to say we are through with this program. And we told him that we were going to create an opportunity for Jay to have a real job and a home, a real home in the community, and a life that he loved. And we didn't know how we were going to do it. We were clueless. But we knew we couldn't stay in the program. And listen to what he said to us. He said, and I can remember this just as I can remember where I was when Kennedy was shot and where I was when 9/11 happened. He said, what are you going to do when you fail? That was his comment. What are you going to do when you fail? And we were just so at the end of our coping rope individually. And Jay was at the end of his coping rope. And can you imagine me being speechless? I mean, I sound pretty mouthy, don't I? I was speechless when he said that because we didn't know how we were going to do it. And we were just overwhelmed with the responsibility of developing an enviable life for Jay with no community programs. And Rudd said, we're not going, Holly, you can hear him say this, we're not going to fail, we're going to succeed, and that's not a threat, it's a promise. And he said, come on, Ann, we're out of here. And so we walked to the car not knowing what in the world we're going to do. But I remember thinking, and I say this with, especially to those of you who are African American, with full respect for your journey, that I remember thinking, is this what Martin Luther King felt when he said, free at last? Because I felt free from the system that was strangling us. The system that was paid to help us was strangling us. I felt free from it. And it was this freedom, free at last. We no longer have people telling us we can't do it. We don't know how we're going to do it, but at least we don't have to fight anybody. We just have to figure it out. But there's nobody standing at the gate blocking us. So we felt free at last. So that was an epiphany in our life. Our life was not the same after that moment of kind of starting out on this new road. But the epiphany was strengthened when Kate, who was then, Kate, our younger daughter, who was then about in 4th grade, when Kate had visited Jay, and this had happened, I've gotten my timing a little mixed up here, this had happened with Kate before we had met with the director and was one of the reasons we decided to leave. But Kate had gone to visit Jay in the group home, and she came back to our house and was very perturbed, very quiet, very reticent. And we kept asking her what she was thinking and what was bothering her. And she finally said, think how you would have felt if you were in my place. She said, Mom, I wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want to live there. Why is it okay for Jay to live there? Boy, talk about guilt. And it was true. But, in our community, this program had won awards, and not just in our community, but state awards. And everybody said, isn't it so wonderful that this program for people with disabilities kind of takes care of them out of sight? And Rudd and I knew it wasn't the right program, but we thought we could change it. But we couldn't. But Kate cut through all of it and said it's a double standard. Now let me ask you to think about adults with significant disabilities, even disabilities like the combination of intellectual disability, autism, and bipolar disorder, who you know who have an enviable life, and by enviable, one that you would want for yourself or your family, one that has the same standard of living. That's what Kate was talking about. Jay's standard of living is not what we would want, therefore it's not what he wants either. So how many of you know at least 10 people with very significant disabilities who you think have an enviable life? No hands. 5 people. 1 person. 1 person. Several of you know 1 person. What's wrong with the millions, indeed billions of dollars that have been spent on disability services? And in a room like this, we know no more than 3 or 4 people who have the life that we would want for ourselves. Something is wrong. And that's when we knew what Jim Chancellor told us, that we had to turn around, that we couldn't get there on the road that we were on. So here we are. This was when we started working on getting off the segregated road and getting to this other road, because Jay finished high school and he was far, far, far from the equality of opportunity and full participation in independent living and economic self-sufficiency. So after Jay finishes high school, when being out of the only program in our community for adults with disabilities, having no job, having family friends, but not really friends of his own, he had a pretty blank slate of his weekly calendar was empty. And we hired a guy to take him to exercise. And on Monday afternoons from 4 to 5:30. And I was thinking back, why were we helping Jay be physically fit if we were worrying about him hitting and choking? But we did try to help him get stronger. But we were lucky. Or maybe the universe was with us. Maybe the universe was with us like it was with us when we found Cordelia, or when Dodd and Jim Chancellor found us. But we hired a guy to take Jay to exercise, Chuck Rhodes, and Chuck was the educational advisor at a fraternity on campus at the university, the SAE fraternity. So he would pick Jay up and they would go exercise, and then often they'd go back over to the fraternity house and just kind of hang out. Well, at the fraternity house, a lot of the guys were playing music, and we were fortunate that this was at the time of Rain Man. Probably many of you have seen the movie Rain Man. This was at the time when these guys in the fraternity kind of wanted to be Tom Cruise. They kind of thought it was interesting to hang out with a person who experienced the idiosyncrasies of autism. So, and they were kind of really enthralled with Jay's musical ability, all the songs he knew. For a person who could hardly read a word, he knew every verse to every song they ever put on. So he was intriguing to them. So then they started taking Jay, let's go to the basketball games, and inviting him over for meals and going to parties. And you know what we learned? what you get kicked out of programs or people with disabilities for, they do at fraternities every Saturday night. A little choking, a little hitting, a little noise coming from various crevices in your body. All of that was very, very normal. In fact, Jay raised the standard of behavior at the fraternity. And I thought, why is it that programs where people with disabilities get so uptight about so many of the things that young guys and young women are doing all the time? I love this picture. This is the pirate party at the fraternity. Which one of these people has disability? Do you see how well you fit in at the pirate party at the fraternity house? Now let me tell you about this guy with Northwestern on his shirt. He's from Chicago, Pat Hughes. Pat Hughes was Jay's major mentor in the fraternity. Pat was looking for a purpose in his own life. Pat needed Jay as much as Jay needed Pat. And they became buddies. The fraternity voted to have Jay as an honorary brother. Pat then and one of the other fraternity guys, Corey, who we'll see in a video in a few minutes, started encouraging every sorority and fraternity and every campus program at KU to bring in one or two people with disabilities. But many of you have probably heard of Best Buddies. It's a one-to-one match. A great thing about what they call natural ties is the person was matched to the organization and to people in the organization. So when people graduated every year, new people came in. Jay had his connection. Oh, wait a second. Jay had his connection with the fraternity for 28 years. And now Pat started Natural Ties at a number of other universities. Natural Ties could be a project at UNC. It could be, when I say a project, at KU, it's been going all of that time. There are now probably over 100 people with disabilities and 400 or 500 undergraduate students at KU who are part of Natural Ties. The Natural Ties leaders at KU could mentor leaders at UNC in replicating this program. So this isn't just a coincidence that happened that Jay was lucky at happening for. This has been a whole movement at KU to keep this going, and it's been very, very wonderful. So then Jay started having friends, and then he was one of our friends, Jean Ann Summers, was director of a program for people with disabilities, and she said, if we are getting federal money to do training and technical assistance for people with disabilities, we should practice what we preach, and we should hire Jay as a clerical aide. And so here's Jay getting his first paycheck. Pat, his buddy, his probably first real peer friend, and Jean Ann giving that. Jay worked at the University of Kansas for 22 years, successfully, not in the sheltered workshop. There were a lot of challenges. It was hard, especially in his bipolar cycle of his low depression and his high. It was really hard to calibrate his job coaching to these different cycles of activity and energy and motivation. And Lois was, gosh knows, so helpful on so many occasions. All of the coworkers were, as people really surrounded Jay and supported him. Jay learned clerical skills. He didn't read, but he learned to, in high school, his teacher had taught him to file by the second letter. And he would do mail sorting and copying and collating and recycling and those sorts of tasks that somebody would be doing and he loved the job, whereas other people who would have done that would not have enjoyed it so much. So we got the job in place, the fraternity was starting some social life, but it still felt like, oh my gosh, there's still so much to do for Jay to have a full life, for that calendar to be full, and for it not to just have some isolated activities. You may have heard about Sisyphus from Greek mythology, who had to continually push the rock up the hill. Hi, Lynn. It's wonderful to see you again. Lynn and I go way, way, way back with each other. Welcome. So, if you tried to sneak in, I didn't let that happen, did I? I just wanted to say how happy I am to see your face. So we were feeling like still it was hard, and there were so many barriers. And but we thought, what would happen if we could really pull together the fraternity guys, the co-workers, other friends, other gatekeepers to activities together into a dynamic support process that could really help just fully make Jay's life inclusive. So we thought, how can we foster this? And you know, in developmental disabilities, there's been a type of planning called person-centered planning. But what often happens, it seemed like to us with the person-centered planning that Jay was getting, is there was a lot of energy put into creating a plan and really little to no energy put into implementing the plan. So you would meet every year and develop some fantastic plan only to wait 12 months and to meet back and to develop that plan again, but with the family really being left to create the supports that were put into place. So we thought, okay, we want a group, we want action, and the planning. So group action planning. And I'm just going to hit the highlights, and there's a handout. Barbara, are those out on the table? Oh, in your packet, there's a handout about tips, really concrete on-the-ground tips of what we did and what others have done to implement group action planning. But first, inviting support of the fraternity guys, of the co-workers, you'll learn later, Jay needed to learn to ride the bus. So the bus driver and somebody from the bus company and people from the church and neighbors. You know, how do we get a group going? And Jay loved music, so we needed people who had access to music opportunities. And one of the people that we asked who was so instrumental was head of the practicum placement at the university for music therapy students. She had this whole corral of talented musicians who were looking for people for music therapy, and she was a fabulous member of the group action. So then we had been to so many meetings that were so isolated, that were so report driven, that were so deficit oriented, and not necessarily fun. And we thought, what if you couldn't distinguish between a party and a meeting? How do we do this so that people don't feel drained when they come, but they feel rejuvenated? And I'm going to show just a little snippet of we'll see 2 videos in a row. They're each just a minute and a half or so. The first is Corey, one of the fraternity guys, introducing himself at one of the group action planning meetings, and you can feel the ambiance of the meeting. Then we'll go right into a second video. At that meeting, there was the new job coach for Jay, and she did not know Jay, really, and didn't know any of us. And so I was facilitating the meeting, and I asked everybody to say one positive thing about Jay that they wanted her to know. And so think about what you hear in this 60 seconds of positiveness and how this kind of transforms from being the hitter and the choker who's expelled from the program. That's the person they're talking about, that same person that happened to. And this was a meeting about 4 years into our group action planning. People stayed for so long because the meetings were fun and it was about them as well as about us. It was like a support group for everybody. And at this meeting, the topic was a very serious topic. What would we do if Rudd and I were like on a plane together and went down because there was no safety net, there was no program. We were it. So the purpose of this meeting was to talk about how do we kind of help put more infrastructure in place so it all doesn't depend upon Ann and Rudd to do it. So Lois, you're gonna get us up here to these, and we'll do one right after the other. I've got a trimmer in my right hand and it's hard for me to kind of quickly click here. Glad you're doing this, Lois, rather than me.
He only has nice things to say about people, and he has no enemies. A lot of good friends.
Oh, okay, this is the first one on the positive things, then we'll see the other.
Jay has a really good heart, and he means well to all the people.
I think Jay really knows how to enjoy life. And I've learned how to enjoy life just by being around him, slowing down, knows what he likes, and he won't be pushed.
Well, working with him today, I found out he's a hard worker. He worked just right along everything I asked, and he just took it and did it. So it's great.
He always sings songs with me. Whenever I want to sing a song, he always sings.
Good.
Kate, Jay's younger sister.
He's my best buddy.
That's Rudd.
Great.
Best man. You're my best man, JT. That's me. You're it.
No. He's very empathetic with other people's feelings, particularly their sadness or their frustration.
There's some
that
complication
he really
here.
likes to comfort and nurture.
Sorry. You can just maybe listen to the audio.
Simple, and he appreciates things that are very simple.
Okay. Chris?
And I'll add to that, he's quiet. You don't feel, with Jay, you don't feel obligated to entertain. It's just, let's be together.
Okay.
There's a formal course that's taught in a lot of colleges and universities, and it's called Music Appreciation. And Jay would be a great person to teach such a course because he is the greatest appreciator of music.
That's the music therapy faculty member.
I'd say lots of friends.
That's
Lots
right.
of friends. He knows what he wants, and he's not afraid to tell you. Jay?
He's very caring and he's very cheerful. He always greets me every day, comes down the hall and says hello, and I appreciate that.
She's
I
head
like
of
to
our
talk to
speech
Jay.
clinic, Jane Wagner.
Jay's very rhythmic. He has more rhythm than so many people that I know, and he's very, very musical.
One of the
Music's
music
very
therapy
important to him.
practicum students.
Jay, how about yourself? One positive comment about yourself?
Yeah.
Something happy about yourself?
Smile.
You smile? You smile a lot. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I'm sorry for that blurriness, and we'll see if we can get someone here who could help us. I think we won't see that next video where you could see Corey, the fraternity guy, because I think from this you could feel just a positive ambiance of relaxation. And think about, this is the person who was hitting and choking in its spell. You know, just inviting people to be positive can make such a difference in the tone of meetings. So from creating connections, then great expectations of saying, what if, and this is something the roommates did at one time, what if Jay learned to ride the city bus? Now, I never thought Jay could learn to do that. But when everybody is kind of thinking a little outside the box, instead of people telling Rudd and me we were unrealistic, other people were encouraging us to take the next step. And that was so wonderful to have what-if people. And then the more the group met, the more positive it became, solving problems. And the whole purpose every meeting was to take something that we really wanted to happen and to figure out how do we make that happen. And at this meeting, the problem was what would happen if something happened to Rudd and me. And I want you just to hear a snippet, you can going to be getting that up, of our daughters, Amy and Kate, because here they were, an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old in a meeting talking about what would happen if something happened to their parents. But you know, often brothers and sisters worry about that, but they don't have the opportunity to bring it out of the closet and to have other people to talk to about it and to know that they're not alone and that there are reliable allies. So let's see, yes. It's not going to the screen.
That, you know, isn't like a negative responsibility, but it's our choice, and that we want to help, but that, you know, we both know that, you know, in the long run, you know, as we talk about it, you know, we're privileged to share the same last name as him, and therefore, you know, we will take the responsibility.
What I really think about mainly is
Can
the
you
financial
hear, or should we
support.
just go
I
on?
don't know how much financial support you all give to Jay. I don't know if his house and everything is covered by his job and by the roommates.
Thank you, Vanessa. We all need reliable allies. We're glad you're here. Okay, I'm going to go in and tell you about this one. They spoke up and said that, and Kate especially was saying that one thing she worried about is what would happen if she and Amy were still in school and something happened to Jay and they didn't have money. And she said, I don't know how much money you give him. I don't know how much money his life
And I don't
costs.
know if when mom and dad die, I'm going to be still studying. I'm still going to be in school. So that really worries me. I don't know how. I mean, again, I don't know how much financial support you give them, and if we're still in school, or Amy has just gotten her first job, or same with me, and we don't have that much money, how we can figure out some way to provide for Jay financially. I mean, that is something that worries me.
Good, thank you for sharing that with us. We can visit about it.
As we plan for Jay's future, we're in a sense are planning for Amy and Kate's future
Can
too.
you hear it? Yes.
And even though it's not fun to think about those things happening because we love each other so much, it is part of living is to plan for how you go on living when things happen.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, it's just, I mean, I think that something we need to think about is Kate and I are, you know, what, I'm 18 and Kate's 15, and when we think about Jay's future, and I think these are important things we're talking about, but we also need to realize, you know, that for me, I mean, I'm just trying to get through the semester, you know, in school, and, you know, I
Honesty.
think that, you know, it's hard for me to try and think, well, when my parents die, you know, that hopefully I'll be at least 35, you know. I mean, I hope that it's going to be, you know, another 20 years or so, you know, but, you know, that, and I think it's important for me to think about these things, you know, what's going to happen when Jay, you know, it's Jay and Kate and I, and we're striving to keep together, but hopefully we can keep this firm base in Lawrence, because I think that there's a lot of resources here and there's a lot of people that care.
Okay, sorry for all of that disruption, but I hope you got the main point of Kate bringing up she really is worried about money. And then we're saying, well, we can talk about that. You know, it wasn't a time at that meeting to go into details, but we'll talk about that. And then Amy's saying, you know, I'm just trying to get through the semester. And I tease her now because she's 39 when she said, and I hope I'm at least 35 by the time you die. And she says, oh, Mom, I'm so glad you didn't die when I was 35. It seems so far away to her at that time. But how do we talk with brothers and sisters? how, and the next morning I remember asking Amy, what was last night like for you? You know, listening to all of that talk about what would happen. And she said this phrase, Mom, it was awesome to be surrounded by people who aren't sorry about Jay. So awesome to be surrounded by people who saw his gifts and were going to be along for the ride, and that just to really feel supported. So that's a huge part of group action planning. And then next, from the solving problems, I want to show you some of the problems that got solved through group action planning. Jay having a home of his own, with a housemate that provided the 24/7 support that he often needed. We were able, through Medicaid, to have what's called participant direction, which meant his Medicaid went to an accountant in our community who cut the checks so we could decide the budget. Do you know how much Jay's budget was? $64,000. That's how much the agency that had him in the timeout booth all day long was getting to serve him. He had a $64,000 timeout experience. When we could get hold of that $64,000, and when I say get hold, through the accountant who kept all the books and who did all of the taxes and all of the bookkeeping, then we could pay a wonderful housemate who was very respectful of Jay. We could pay for people to support Jay in his community participation, to take him to music venues and to restaurants and to support him to become a regular. It was so fabulous. And with his house, we were able to get Section 8 housing, because Medicaid itself doesn't pay for housing, but it pays for support. So we could pay the housemates through Medicaid, help pay for the house through Section 8, and then Jay's mother, biological mother's father, Jay's grandfather, had set up a trust fund, and we worked with the bank for the trust fund to actually own the house, because Jay couldn't get direct money from the trust fund. So you have to learn to manage public resources, private resources, to set up that enviable life. And Rudd and I, now that we're living here, are glad to come back at other times and give you the nuts and bolts that we don't have time to go into today of how to do that. Because you know what we found? Programs around the country and the department that we are in, special education, do not train transition coordinators to know these things because the faculty don't know. The only people who know are the innovative pioneers who have had to figure it out themselves through desperation. And the families who have figured it out haven't written it yet. We would love to partner with people on a grant to write it for people so that they know that what we found is there were plenty of resources. It wasn't a shortage of funding. It was a shortage of knowledge of how to find the funding and how to put it together for what it could pay for and could not pay for. So, music therapy. One of the music therapy students teaching Jay to play 2 color-coded chords on the guitar that just gave Jay such a sense of mastery in terms of playing songs that he enjoyed. Jay's house, not just being a physical place, not just being a house, but a home. This is a birthday party with another physical music therapist sitting beside him, with just friends, co-workers, and as I look at people there, a friend who would hang out with Jay on Friday nights. His friends at his home, he is the host. It's not a group home anymore. It's Jay's home, and he loved to have his friends over. One of the housemates that he had was a fabulous Italian cook. And so, oh boy, did they have great meals and great parties. And Jay could be the sous chef on some of the tasks in the kitchen, and it was really great. Jay and his woman friend. And one of the things that in inclusion, that we thought about is who is going to fall in love with Jay? it's probably not, it's not people who were at the fraternity parties that they loved to socialize with him, but they were not going to fall in love with him. And how important it was for Jay to have a person who loved him and just was wonderful, and that he felt that same way about her. Jay learning to ride the bus, this was from the housemates. And one thing that Jay, in addition to hitting and choking, at that same time he was pulling hair. And sometimes he would pull the hair of women with long, dark hair. So you can imagine the anxiety I feel when I see this picture. But here he is on the bus, but all of the bus drivers had a sheet with Jay's name and contact information, and, you know, and what if Jay was kind of hyped up, what they could do to help him relax some. The bus drivers needed to be part of the solution, and other riders on the bus, and it was his housemates who taught him to do this, and not Rudd and me. What the group action planning ended up with, so many music venues in the community, dancing, listening to music, playing music. It was such a huge part of Jay's life, and that yellow shirt was one of his favorites, and that's one that Grandma Dot gave him from right here in Chapel Hill. So when I need to watch my time, and gosh, there's so much I want to share, and so little time to do it in. I'm going to just quickly tell you this, and then maybe skip the next couple of things I was going to tell you. But after Jay started learning to ride the bus, his, people in the group were saying, well, actually, I'm remembering now, it was just the opposite. He first learned to ride a taxi. And then from the taxi, he learned to ride a bus. But when he was learning to ride the taxi, I was really worried that a taxi driver might steal his money, might call him names, might go in his house when he was going in, and I don't mean to criticize taxi drivers. I just didn't know them, and it was like, how do we, is Jay really safe outside of the relationships that were surrounding him? So I went to the local taxi company, and I didn't know what I was going to say. I found them. They were on the edge of town. I walked into this trailer, and Shirley, the co-owner of the taxi company, was the dispatcher, and I was telling her that I had a son with some disabilities, and we were really interested in him learning to ride a taxi. And she said, well, tell me about your son. So I started telling her about Jay, and she said, well, what are your concerns? And then I started telling her all these awful things I was worried about. And I said, I'm not criticizing you or your staff. It's just a mother's hormones. And so she said, is there anything else you're worried about? And I said, well, what if somebody tried to molest him? And so it got to just the worst thing that it could possibly be. And then she was saying, well, I understand. She said, I'm a mother. I would feel the same way. I felt as if I had an experienced therapist who was affirming and understanding and telling me that she understood and that we could find a way out of this, because she was so fabulous. And then she opened her drawer and she took out this little wrinkled paper of red card and this little wrinkled green card. And she said, I'm giving you my green card of understanding. I'm giving you my green card of friendship. I'm giving you my green card of being with you until we resolve this. And I had tears coming down my face. I couldn't believe this was happening in a trailer with a co-owner of a taxi company. And I said, Shirley, what's this all about? And she said, don't you understand, Ann? She said, you work at the university and you teach people and you have a chance to influence people. She said, I want to do really good things in my life in influencing people too. And she said, so every day I get up and I ask the good Lord to let me take as many red cards as possible. I've taken your red card of worry about this and your red card of worry about that, and I've given you my green cards. And she said, now we're going to work it out. And so then she said, give me 24 hours. She said, we'll match Jay with one driver, but I don't want to limit him. So we'll match him with one driver, and they'll get to know each other, and they'll become friends. Then we'll bring in a second driver, and we'll do that through my 18 drivers, so he can drive with everyone. And she said, I'll call you tomorrow, but I want to think who the first one should be. So the next day she called in, she said that she was talking to Jim, and she told Jim about Jay, and that she wanted him to be the first driver. And Jim said, Shirley, why did you pick me? And Shirley said, Jim, you need a friend as much as Jay Turnbull needs one. So, but what I want, a major message I want to leave you with, all of you who are family members and people who are service providers and students, is there are so many green cards in the community of people who have never been asked. Or they've only been asked to say, would you come to the fundraiser at the disability program and buy tickets or buy a table. They haven't been asked to figure things out on a one-to-one basis, and they've got green cards. And what Jay learned to do was to give green cards back. We love to make pecan pies. And Jay would always at Christmas help make a pecan pie for Shirley. And as she drove people in the taxi, she would say, you know, the Turnbulls there at the university, they say their son Jay has a disability, but anybody who can make a pecan pie in my book doesn't have a disability. So she did a lot of public relations, and he needed it after choking the legislator's son. So that continual exchange of green cards is a very important lesson, and I'm going to skip these and go to the huge element of group action planning, which is celebrating success. And let's all cross our fingers that that Vanessa's going to get this up for us. We didn't do this much celebrating at every meeting. This was an unusual meeting because, after all, we're talking about when we die, you know, and what's going to happen. And people had been with us for 4 years by this time, and we wanted to do something a little special that could really help let people know what they meant to us. So it's the previous one. It's the one that was up first, right before you pulled this one up. Right there, yes.
That ultimately, you know, we are, you know, his family members, and we do have the responsibility.
It was the...
So one of my first big...
No. Okay. Oh. This one, that one.
One of the great things, I think, if we all open our candles, is that every candle that people have is a different color. If you kind of look around the room, they're all the same size, but they're all a different color. And every candle is a different fragrance. And would you light our candles? If Rudd and I were the only support for Jay, that it's just this much light that could generate for his life. And as hard as we worked, or as much as we tried to do, it would still be just the one family light. We kind of go to his sisters, and they add to his life, and each of you here add. You look at all the light, and as Rudd said earlier, I think one thing that we learned when they said to us, what are you going to do when you fail, is that it was going to be better for us to light a candle than to curse the darkness. But it's really all of the light from all of our candles that make this possible. And Rudd was saying earlier, and we want to underscore it so much, that the lights that shine here for Jay shine for each of you. And that as we look around the room, I really hope that we all have a sense that one of the greatest things that people with disabilities need is to have people to belong to, but it's one of the greatest needs that we all have. And through coming together for Jay, we come together for each other.
Well, can I say something on your behalf, Jay? I mean, you have honored me with great compliments and with great help, and I always have the sense that I feel that when you talk, that you owe it to me, and that I'm giving you a great favor, and I have never expressed back, and I think that is. I'm sure that if we ask here around the room, they probably would share the same feelings. And what I want to say is that I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to interact with Jay, not because he's so great and he's so amicable and likable and such a good friend, but because what I think that you're doing, it is really unique. And you are pushing the frontiers of mental retardation into being not so much an exclusive disability, but more like an inclusive disability that everybody has to share. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this enterprise. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine.
5 years ago, we couldn't have thought of tonight. And the exciting thing for all of us is with all of the different gifts and talents represented by all the different colors of the candle, what will the year 2000 be like in Jay's life? What will 2010 be like? What will 2020 be like?
We won't fit in this room.
And for everything that you've done for all of us, we thank you. And for everything that we all have to look forward to in the future, we celebrate. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that wonderful? So here we are, thanking people for being part of the essence of Jay's life, and then Jesus speaks up and says, no, we thank you. You know, we thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. And such a key aspect of group action planning is a point that I was making at the beginning, that it was for everyone. When people in the group had a sadness occur or something wonderful, we were either supporting and grieving with someone or celebrating their happiness. That one of the things about person-centered planning in the disability field is that it teaches us that it's all about the person with a disability, what that person wants. But what Jay had to learn is it was about everybody, that it wasn't always about him, that being a giver is as wonderful, or more wonderful sometimes, as being the receiver. And so the people who were there that night, that was, 25 or more years ago now. You can go in and set this up. But it still is so prevalent in people's mind because it was such a moment of connection and a moment of commitment for all of us to each other. So this next slide moves us forward to Jay's memorial service. This, as I said at the beginning, 6 years ago, January 7th, last week, when one of our work colleagues and dear friends of Jay's and mine and Rudd's, Mike Waymeyer, gave one of the eulogies, and listen to what he puts his finger on as the determining element of Jay's life.
Ultimate lesson to me came this past week. When the press release announcing Jay's death was posted Wednesday night, I paused after I read the link from the KU homepage to that news release. That link read this. It said, "University mourns longtime employee Jay Turnbull." Think about that for a moment. That headline could just as easily have read, "University mourns son of distinguished professors," or "University mourns special worker." Instead, the headline points out a simple fact, that Jay was a person in and of himself, independent of who his parents were, or whether he had a disability or did not have a disability. He was a person who worked for 20 years and who contributed greatly to the mission of the Beach Center, the Lifespan Institute, the School of Education, and the University of Kansas. And in reflecting on that headline and thinking about Jay and his impact on my life and the lives of others, I realized that the most important lesson Jay taught me was not really about the possible lives that people with severe disabilities can lead, that people with severe disabilities could live in their own homes or perform meaningful work or lead full social life. These are important lessons. I don't want to undermine those. But those lessons are really about the business of education or the business of rehabilitation or the myriad of professions that provide the supports that sustain Jay and people like Jay. Know what Jay taught me and what I believe he taught so many people around the world who join us today to mourn his passing and to celebrate his life, was that we are not in the education business or the rehabilitation business or any other business. We are each of us in the dignity business. By the quality of his character and the example of his life, Jay reminds us of the dignity of living full lives, lives rich with friends and family, and the dignity of work and the security of home and the joy and the gift that is each and every day.
Let's go and do the next one. The dignity business. Think how far Jay had come from the timeout booth, from the segregated road. You know, and for the headline to say university mourns longtime employee, isn't that a tribute to Jay, who being his own person and his community really supporting him? Something that Rudd and I, even with our specialty in the disability field, never could have pulled off by ourselves. That it took the community, it took the radio dispatcher and the bus driver and the music therapist, you know, and the other stories that I would have told you, the local restaurant owners, you know, all of the people who had their eyes on Jay, the police, who knew him, who felt bonded to him, and when he needed help, they were there to provide it. So this was, from Mike talking, the service at our church celebrating Jay's life. That evening, there were so many fraternity brothers and music therapists and job coaches and co-workers and friends who had come back for Jay's, for the services for Jay, that we wanted to have some kind of opportunity to gather and to celebrate Jay's life more fully. And so you're going to see the end of that gathering when the same person, Della, one of the music therapists who was sitting by Jay, who was saying Jay was very rhythmic, she was playing the guitar and singing with Jay at the action group meeting. Here, 20 years later, you're going to playing the guitar and present as we all gathered to, and I want you, when you look at this, to remember that schedule of Jay, that calendar, and he had this one paid commitment. Look at this and think about what happened when people were really in the dignity business.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. We've got the light of freedom, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For Jay Turnbull. For J. Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. For J. Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. For J. Turnbull, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For our brothers and our sisters.
Amy McCart, when we had that meeting 16 to 18 years ago, and I said, what will be happening in 2005 and 2010? And you said, we won't fit into this room. And I'll have to say that we were going to have this gathering at Jay's home tonight, but we couldn't fit into the room. And so we had to rent a place. Amy, the providence came true, and now we can go out and take that light into the lives of all of those people that Paul Marchand reminded us about. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for all that has been. We look forward to all that will be. We will keep Jay's legacy alive. We thank all of you who have traveled. We wish you safe travels home. And we will continue to share life's journeys together. God bless. Okay, so this was, when we say it takes a village, indeed it does. You know, and everybody in that room over the years, at one time or another, had been part of Jay's enviable life that really enabled him to live in a way that we would all want to have a chance to live. So remember the schedule that we started with, paying the choke roads to take Jay to the fraternity. This is where it started, when he was just moving from the segregated road to the integrated road. This is what his life was like on the day he died, with this mixture of work and leisure and communication and music, massage, yoga, church, and a very, very full life, always needing support. Here's a young man who didn't cross the street safely by himself, who who in his moments of bipolar depression was really immobilized for a week or more and hardly being able to get out of bed. But still, with the support, he could have the life that you've heard about. So I asked you at the beginning, what did Jay teach us over 4 decades? What do you think what's the major theme here? What do you think? What did it take? Was it who he knew? Was it what he knew? Thoughts about what he taught us? It was not simply what he knew or simply who he knew or who his family knew, but it was how well he and his reliable allies could create trusting partnerships that were reciprocal. Not partnerships where he was the center of attention, but partnerships that were reciprocal. Reciprocity enabled his partnerships to grow exponentially and to flourish in creating those policy promises that we started with. Do you think he had equality of opportunity? Did he have full participation? Did he have independent living? And did he have economic self-sufficiency through his wages and through his public benefits? So let's go back to that 2-row diverging, and I'll do just a little change in the last verse. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and Jay took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. So, I want to tell you the very last chapter, and our time is going, so there's not going to be as much time for comments, but I'll be available to you on a long-term basis. When Jay died, we've learned a lot about what Viktor Frankl wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp, and he was writing about the love that he felt for his wife, not knowing whether she was alive or dead in another camp. But he said love goes very far beyond a physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual self. Set me like a seal upon should be thy heart. Love is as strong as death. My mother had died in the early 70s, and when she died, a very beautiful butterfly came and flew all around the cemetery service, around her casket, around her family, around her friends, and people kind of at the service were kind of taken with this butterfly because it was so present and it was so dominant, and it was as if it was her spirit. And then later, we didn't know at the time, but later we learned that the butterfly in the Christian tradition is the symbol for immortality and resurrected life. And I can remember hearing that at a church service and thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't kind of know how to incorporate this kind of paranormal experience of seeing this butterfly. And we've had many, many butterflies over the years. Like when Kate came home from the hospital here in Chapel Hill, and we took her out of the car and were carrying her inside our house, a butterfly came and lit on her blanket and went in the house with us and went in the nursery with us, you know, and it was like, oh gosh, this is a spiritual connection. So when Jay died, I remember thinking, well, I see a butterfly, you know, and on the day of his service, I was kind of looking for butterflies and didn't see any. I was a little disappointed, but that was okay. And then several days later, Rudd and I and Amy and Kate were walking downtown in Lawrence, and Kate needed to buy a gift for a friend, and we went in a gift store. And in the gift store, I looked over around, and there was a shelf with very bright things. And you can tell I'm a color girl, right? So I'm drawn to color, and I went over to look at this, and it was several different things in the same motif, coffee cups and different things, but there was the sun catcher that you could hold up to the light, and see the colors coming through, and I held it up in front of me and looked at it, and then I turned it around and looked at it from the back, just looking at the color on both sides. And look what I saw. Do you see anything kind of strange? What do you see? His initials. I couldn't believe it. I could hardly get my breath. Look. Have you ever seen a butterfly with JT on the initials? I had not either until this day. I was just aghast. And here it was, several days after he died, and I took it over to Rudd and showed him and to Amy and Kate. And what was just perfect is when you looked at this front ways, this symbol was reversed. So it was like a T and a J going the other way. Of course, you had to find the JT by looking at it in a different way. Of course it wouldn't be on the front. Of course it would be on the back. I was telling one friend about this, of just feeling that Jay's spirit was still connected. And she said, well, maybe it's Jay's spirit, but maybe it's also your mother's spirit saying she has enfolded Jay. I said, that's a nice thought. I'll take that. But what I leave you with is that I hope when you see butterflies that you will think about the dignity business. I hope that you will think about reciprocal relationships that not only endure the test of time, but really are infinite. And I think that has been, we started out with Tamara saying that Rudd and I so often say Jay has been our best professor. And that is the essence of what he's taught us at its most fundamental level. That it is really through the reciprocal relationships and infusing people with opportunities for dignity that transformation happens, and that those promises of our country become into full fruition. And so I want to say again how sorry Rudd is that he's not well today, but from both of us, what a joy it is to be back in North Carolina, that Thomas Wolfe was wrong. You really can go home again, and that we are here and eager to share with you the nuts and bolts. We've described, about 20 to 25 years of advocacy and change, but to tell you in more detail how to bring this dignified life, this enviable life into being. So thank you for this opportunity, and we have just about 10 minutes, but I welcome any comments and questions.
Wow.
Thank you.
I think that is a charge to us all. I just wanted to get the microphone if there were any questions. It's over here. Any questions? Comments? Of course it would be Holly.
Thank you so much, Anne, and all of our friends and colleagues here. I know that I'm looking forward to hearing you and Rudd talk about a subject I don't think I've ever heard you talk about, and that is growing old together and aging parents, because there are so many aging parents and aging adults with disabilities. So hope you'll do that at some point.
That would be wonderful to think about it. It was so crazy in our lives that we spent a lot of time thinking, how do we keep support going for Jay after we die? Never thinking he would predecease us, you know, but really still so thankful that those things were in place, because you never know. But there are so many aging families where individuals with disabilities have lived at home with the parents all their lives, and then as the parents are aging, that Rudd and I know well about in our own life, and retiring, and you know, how do they keep things moving forward? And then brothers and sisters, you know, so often say that it's filled with so much tension in their family that it's never talked about. It's what their role is going to be, and they really worry about that. And it is definitely, in terms of aging, something we need to address. So thank you, Holly, for bringing up that lifespan stage where so much is needed. There was, I'll just say, I don't know your name, but I'm gonna point to you. You, yes. And your name is? Elaine. And I just felt, Elaine, I'll just have to say a connection, and I saw you nodding, you know, and I felt as if maybe some of our experiences had been experiences in your life.
Well, I'm not a social worker, I'm an educator.
Uh-huh.
I'm here to control the equity.
Yeah.
I would very much like to talk to you about this network of students with disabilities.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We've got to do a better job of giving them opportunities.
Right.
And making their lives meaningful.
Right. Yes. That was kind of written on your face, you know, that you've had that strong belief. Yeah.
Yes,
so.
and I appreciate your comments. And,
yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Elaine, and thank you for the long drive and for being here.
Well, my mom lives in Oxford, so I
good. A
spend the
twofer.
night and get home and cook me.
Good. A threefer. Yeah. Yeah, that's fabulous. Okay. Any other comments?
Thank you so much. You've really encouraged me. My name is Brian Buxton. My wife and I are still struggling to put together the elements in the life of our 27-year-old son. And I just wanted to ask all of you and the organizers whether you'd be willing to share your emails, all of us, with each other, and that we can stay in touch and connect and be a part of this kind of network for all of the children of all of the parents here. I think that would be a great idea, and I hope we can do it somehow, maybe with a Facebook page, but maybe just by sending us everybody's email, if that's possible.
Well, thank you. I think we'll definitely have some opportunity for follow-up.
Good.
We're not going to let you off that hook so easily. Anyone else? Okay.
Lynn, I wonder, I know you are director of the of volunteer or community service. Yeah. And so could you see like the natural ties or some of the things that we've talked about, you know, in terms of university students being supported?
Sure. I'd be happy. We have a weekly listserv that goes out to about 5,000 people that details opportunities for students, staff, faculty, not just limited to students. And what I can do, you know how to find me. But we could send the link. You can sign up for that listserv, be part of it. But also, there are a lot of resources on campus that aren't always connected, and maybe something like this would be a way of beginning to bring people together. Many students who are particularly interested in being part of something like this. So
that would be
we'd be happy to
great. And Brian, that
part
would
of
be a
that.
wonderful resource for your son, you know, in terms of connectivity to university organizations.
There actually is a new program that just opened last week on campus. Is anybody here from the Chapel Hill schools? Do you know about PATHs? Yes. Okay, anyway, so we now have, I think it's five young adults on campus who are part of Chapel Hill schools who are learning about different job opportunities on campus, learning about work. They have job coaches, but they're part of our campus now. And I think that it's a real opportunity with these young people for us as a campus to be responsive to them being a true part of the work we do here.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. I was so happy you're in that place because I know that you'll have an inclusive emphasis.
I'm Deb Zuver, and I co-facilitate the North Carolina Post-Secondary Education Alliance. So it's a group of people looking to expand inclusive post-secondary. And I was thinking about, when I saw the involvement of Jay with the fraternities, one of a model demonstration site, an amazing program about Western Carolina, a couple of the students at the university participant opportunity there have become involved with a lot of on-campus activities. And this past year, a couple of them were involved with the fraternity. It was an amazing experience for both the fraternities and the participants. And so these you know, just wonderful natural ways that our campus communities are becoming more inclusive, which of course leads to enriching our broader communities. So it's exciting to see these things happen, and clearly, as we saw with Jay, they've happened in other places too, and hopefully happening more and more now.
Wonderful. And I'm so glad you mentioned the post-secondary. That's such a great initiative because, you know, 20 years ago when we were working on this, it was innovative for a person with significant disability similar to Jay's to have an opportunity for integrated work. But now that glass ceiling has been passed, and then this next glass ceiling is the university experience itself, not just being part of a fraternity, but part of the larger campus, and that's great that you're doing that. And then we need to think what's going to be next after that, that we can always push the limits so that there are newer and newer opportunities for people to have inclusive experiences. So thank you for really emphasizing that post-secondary.
North Carolina Family Support Network, the ARC of North Carolina, the Carolina Institute on Developmental Disabilities, the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, some really amazing looking next generation leadership, graduates of Partners in Policy Making, representatives of Cardinal Innovations, one of our LMEMCOs, and graduates of Advancing Strong Leaders in Developmental Disability sitting in this room.
Let me give you an applause.
Now, this is some really powerful leadership along with the community that Ann and Rudd are part of nationally, the community that you're part of. I would really like to encourage all of us to use today as an opportunity to recommit to the heart and the soul of the work that we do, led by families and led by individuals with disabilities. And I'd also like to thank Ann and Rudd and Jay and their family for a lifetime of service that is still continuing. Thanks, Ann.
Thank you, Holly. Very beautifully said.
A young woman with a physical disability who graduated in December have actually been asked by the mayor of Chapel Hill to think about what an advisory group around disabilities would look like locally. some of the people in this room were named as resources for this woman to talk to yesterday when I gave her. She's interested particularly in talking to folks in the community who have the perspective of families and as well as professionals. So I would really appreciate it if any of you would be willing and have that local perspective and might be willing to talk to this recent graduate and this professor who are helping Mayor Kleinsmith. Give me your name, your email, whatever, and I know she would love to talk to you. So I
Great.
just figured I have the bully pulpit here, we'll take it.
Thank you, Lynn. That's wonderful.
And that, of course, was Lynn Blanchard, for those of you who want to follow up. Any other questions, comments? Thank you all so much for coming today.